Hi, welcome to a Further Inquiry podcast. I'm Matthew Gennaro, Editor-in-Chief of Further Inquiry. Further Inquiry is a place for playing gracefully with ideas. We are a reader-supported publication for free inquiry, brazen critique, and dissenting ideas.
Hi, and I'm Khadija Khan, a journalist and editor at A Further Inquiry. Matthew and I jointly host this podcast monthly. You can support our work by becoming a paid subscriber to A Further Inquiry today.
Well, hello everyone. I have the pleasure today to be joining with Gerfried Ambrosch. Gerfried.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
It's it's perfect. It's timely today with everything going on now. With I believe you said an hour before the first results come in of the elections in Germany. It's what do you think should be noted right now? What do you think? Do you think people should be worried, panicked? Do you think there should be any surprises that wouldn't have been seen or even just considered, say, a decade ago?
Well, I always see let cooler heads prevail in situations like this. I mean, it's gonna be like a historic sort of election in terms of the alternative for German party, the AfD, which is sort of like the far right party in Germany right now. I mean, we're gonna see in just a couple hours, but according to polls, they're gonna be the runner-up
Right.
to Chancellor, coming in second after just behind the Conservatives, with the Social Democrats probably getting third place, and then after that it's unpredictable. So it's because there's a couple more parties that
Right.
have a chance. There's the Greens, who were in the last, or actually current government still, because they're still in the government, as well as the FDP, which is the sort of libertarian party. So they had this three-way government for a couple of years now, and they called it, I don't know if the term translates, but they called it like the traffic light coalition. I don't know
Okay.
if that term like made it across the big pond, because it's like the reds, the yellows, sort of like the libertarians are sort of yellow, and the greens. So it's like the traffic light coalition, sort
Right.
of like the term they used, and that just recently fell apart. Pretty much because the libertarians didn't see eye to eye on a number of issues with the other two parties, and so they just basically broke up the coalition government, which is why they called these general elections early. So this is they weren't supposed to take place until I think next year. So this is like an early election. And of course, in situations like that, the voters a lot of them will probably be out to punish the previous government, as is always the case. And the AfD party, they've been really great at sort of like taking advantage of that atmosphere, that general sentiment in the population, which is why they're gonna pretty certainly come in second, probably somewhere between 20 or even 30% of the votes. So it's going to be quite an election result, I'm sure, that we're going to see tonight.
Absolutely. It's interesting to see. Like I've been watching the trajectory for, I think, more intensely than most novice for multiple years with the alternative Germany, and I guess you might say the collection of far right entities in German politics. And it's, to me, there's a universalness to that because it seems the legitimate issues that the left should be talking about, or the liberals should be talking about, if you want to make a political distinction there.
Anyone.
Centrist, certainly, absolutely. It's a completely valid point. They've brushed these legitimate issues away, and they've been co-opted and distorted by parties of the far right for their own narratives, for that matter, and own agendas.
Right, and I mean, I'm not the only one, of course, but I've been writing about this for years, and like every election, they're getting a little closer, to the leading position or whatever, and it's just and the other parties, sort of like left of center, centrist, center right, they just waited too long, and then like in the last year or two, maybe, they started to like develop the same rhetoric the far right used to have on these issues, and they were trying to out far right the far right, if you will, with
Yeah.
their rhetoric, and like, we can deport this many people, can and of course, if you're in government, talk is cheap. You have to like show that you can actually do it. Whereas the opposition party, like the AfD and an opposition party like the AfD, all they have to do is like say like what they would do rather than
Exactly.
actually being in a position of having to do anything really. And but the problem is, with these sort of like knockoff rightists, sort of like that are imitating the far right at this point, people just much rather go for the original than the copy.
Yeah.
So it's just like a race you can't win. So you have to sort of like make rational points about actual problems. But of course, you can't just undo the last 2 decades of just ignoring problems that were there. And now with all these small scale but still terrorist attacks that we've seen. I mean, I lost count. I mean, this
Oh
is
God, yeah.
from like Mannheim to Solingen to Magdeburg to Aschaffenburg to what was the last one? Villach in Austria, which was really
Hmm.
terrible, which is like close to where I work, um, where a guy from Syria just like fatally stabbed a 14-year-old and injured two more um, very seriously. Then there was one in this was last week, and then there was one in Berlin on Friday,
Hmm.
Friday nights is like 2 days ago, and there was another stabbing yesterday in the sort of like French-German border region, a small town there. So it just keeps happening, and it's really strange. Of course, every attack like that really helps the far right, and all they have to
Right.
do is like basically just you know feed into the or sort of use the take advantage of the sentiment that is always going to build up because there's it's easy to blame those who were in power, and it's just justified to blame them to a certain extent. But of course, simple solutions for complex problems are usually not the ones that work. So
Absolutely.
yeah, we're gonna see. But of course, all of this is just way too complex and complicated to really sort of be taken into account by the average voter.
And that's that's to me I think the key point there, and that's again I think that's a universal. These are because they haven't been addressed when they have been arisen and they've just been built up and built up. They are now very complex issues, and to address them in a mere few months to voters or to express your possible solutions or approaches to these issues might not even be possible, really, because people want what are you going to do? They want a quick answer. And I think that perfectly draws in people who otherwise might be on the fence politically, might be centrist, but have legitimate concerns, like most citizens in Germany do, and are pulled into, and that's also true anywhere, are pulled into that far right narrative, pulled into that we got the solutions. We're the only party with the solutions. That to me is a very evident failure of the centrist, failure of the left parties to not step up and say, hey, we have solutions, we have practical solutions, and it's not going to be something that's to denigrate or to dehumanize, etc. I think you see that also, to bring it over the pond. I think you can see that in the US too, to comparison, this inability for left and liberal and centrist politicians and parties to portray themselves as parties of solutions, practical solutions, because they simply don't address the issues.
Right, and that's been the case for far too long, and now it just might be too late for these parties. I mean, see, the general thinking seems to be like with the established parties seems to be okay. We can have this firewall built up. That's what they call
Mhm.
it, like a firewall against the far right, which is just not going to work with them. But obviously, after a certain point, at a certain like percentage of the votes, you just can't do that anymore and still call yourself like a Democrat, right? In a small d Democrat. That's just not how it works. And now the AfD is already in a bunch of local governments, sort of like forming coalitions with other parties, because on the local level, especially in Eastern German provinces,
Mhm.
there doesn't seem to be that fear of sort of like them being that far right.
Right.
It seems to be the case that you know they're just more pragmatic about that. sort of local politicians. They're more pragmatic about that, and they will work with AfD candidates and sort of like AfD officials or whatever. And so I don't know if this is something that's well known. It's like in Canada and in the States, that the what we call the blue wave, because blue is the color of the AfD here,
Right.
um, moved like from the east to the west. So it was the eastern provinces, former sort of like communist areas where they gained a foothold first, became really really strong, leading the polls, sort of really being um, in positions of power now
Hmm.
over there. And people there, just it's really weird. It almost seems like the sort of like a sense of liberal democracy doesn't seem to be as established or as developed there, given the history, even though it's been 30 years. But still, there's differences. There's differences in income between the East and the West, and all these kinds of
Right.
social differences. So that might explain why it was easier for them, because they already had, what was it, like 45 years, pretty much. Yeah, I think it was 45 years of a sort of like authoritarian dictatorship over there, right? Whereas the
Right.
West didn't have that. So maybe they're less sensitive, or even though they should be more sensitive, or sort of
You would think.
to that. But there's been this over there, like sort of like the younger generations, and a lot of people there seem to have this sense of nostalgia for
Mm.
this simpler time where sort of like everything would be dictated from the top down. And but at the same time, everybody had a job, everybody had enough food on their plate, even though you have to sort of like be in a line for hours for exotic stuff like bananas or
Right.
things like that. uh,
I think that's a good point too you're making there. I think
like
that
for instance, I mean, just to throw in like a little anecdote there. So a friend of mine my age, who grew up in Eastern Germany, like just to show the difference there, like he, like for his 10th birthday, his wish was like a can of pineapple. Like that was his birthday wish when he was like 10 years old. And then his parents had to go out and try and organize like canned
wow.
pineapple, right? So that's the difference. Whereas a few kilometers to the west, you had the what they called the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. Everybody was well off, and it was just like full employment and all that. And you had full scale capitalism, just all the products you could think of. So it's a big difference there. And 45 years is not a short time, and it leaves its marks. And I think that might help to explain it to an extent. But now it's ironic, because the communists in the East, they called the border fence between the East and the West and the Berlin Wall. They called it like the anti-fascist barrier, right?
Right.
They considered the West to be sort of like the successors of Nazi Germany, and so they obviously it was propaganda, right? So for them to justify their own sort of like dictatorship. But
Absolutely.
they had this anti-fascist wall, and now like a lot of people are joking, well, we hope it works the other way, sort of stopping that wave somehow. But I guess those are big promises in over there, federal states
Right.
over there. They make a difference, and we'll see. Yeah, I mean, all polls say that they're gonna be the runner-up this time.
It is frightening. I mean, it's no longer, I think, from my perspective, I don't see it as something where it's like this is funny, even in a dark humor, but it's not funny. Like the rise, but I see where it's coming from. Like from our conversation already, it's from the trajectory. It's the inability, I think, largely with parties to address these issues, and I think you see that universally right now with these illiberal, arguably undemocratic in many ways parties or officials, politicians and parties who are promising this, as you say. I think it's right. I think it's this whimsical, simpler, albeit regressive framework for it was simpler, it was better, and this mythical framework of things. And
It's just
I
it's
think
just
that's
bizarre that it would take this form, because now you have sort of like like a party that obviously deals in scaremongering and all these kinds of things, and it's just very very um, socially conservative, with sort of like a economically liberal spin on it.
Mhm.
But their leader and supposed, like Nazi or whatever, Elise Weidel. I mean, she's married to a Sri Lankan woman, right? I mean, it's just a bizarre turn of events that someone like that would be the leader of, what a lot of people see as a real threat to liberal democracy. I
Hmm.
mean, she's obviously not like a Nazi in the, you know, old sense of the word. But the
Exactly.
problem with the party is that in recent years, because they started out in 2013 as a sort of like center-right, anti-Euro kind of, party, like I guess like a reform in the UK now or something like that, sort of
Hmm.
center-right. And then they just basically the ethno-nationalist far-right wing of the party with people like Björn Höcke, for instance. They really gained a lot of ground and ousted even the founder, Bernd Lucke, the founder, had to leave the party after a while. And so they really took over. And for some reason, they could all agree after a while, after like a lot of infighting, they could all agree on Alice Weidel being sort of like the spokesperson for the party. And yeah, she seems to be doing great, even though yeah, her demeanor has really changed. And she used to be sort of this soft-spoken kind of, you know, almost intellectual kind of person. She
Right.
lives like she lives in Germany and Switzerland, and she has this like, progressive kind of like patchwork family kind of thing. And but if you listen to her just leading up to the elections now, I mean, she's like there was a lot of like shouting, a lot of like aggressive language, almost sort of like, I mean, I don't want to use the term like Hitleresque, but there was just foaming at the mouth kind of rhetoric there,
Absolutely.
and that's very interesting to see. And the more aggressive she got in her performances, the more people seemed to fall for her, and voters seemed to fall for her, and seemed to like, okay, this is now, you know, she swore to, for instance, obviously the like a lot of these parties, they're very like climate skeptical, so they, and they want to go back to like coal and all that,
Right.
that kind of thing, which is to expected. But like in a public address that she gave, she talked about like tearing down all the wind parks, like literally just destroying everything, right? Just tearing it all
Yeah.
down, and things like that. So it's what I'm saying is it's really interesting to see, and sort of like, and I get why people are afraid that, with them in power, which probably isn't going to be now, but might be the case in 2029. You never know. It's like it might take a couple years.
You know, I,
So I get that.
I th- here's a thought. I wonder, and probably would be interesting because to hear what you're going to say. I think I have a feeling I know what your thoughts might be on this. But given the fact that the Christian Democratic Party is considered more like a centrist party in Germany,
Yeah, center right. Even
center,
though with Angela Merkel,
hmm,
the party moved leftward quite a bit.
right,
So just, but mostly due to her laissez-faire sort of approach to immigration. So that was the main
precisely,
thing. She had this in 2015. She had this. Well, it wasn't. It became a slogan later, but sort of like just this statement that she made, where she said like, "Wir schaffen das. We can do it." Sort
hmm,
of like basically as an answer to, okay, you really want to let in like a million Muslims like
yeah.
within a year. It's like, yeah, we can do it. So she had this. So really, that's what a lot of people really haven't forgiven her for, and
No,
the Christian
I think
Democrats. Yeah.
that's rightly so, and I think here's my thought too, Gerfried, is I want, because I see this in the States. I see this, you pretty much see this right now, I think, online a lot with this term, which I find very fascinating. It probably originated in the US, but I think it's pretty much gone international now. Is trad West. And the equating of that usually is to this everything that is of the West is from a Christian standpoint. And not just some generic I identify as a Christian, but it's very fundamental as to that. And it's interesting to see these far right parties and this kind of nostalgic of the family unit, the
Mhm.
nuclear family, and all the things that pertain to this kind of simple but also very regressive framework of what this perfect previous world used to look like. And I think it also is a reaction, definitely a reaction to what they see as a Islamist threat, whether in Germany specifically or Europe more broadly. And I think that from my thinking is the way they present it is to their followers and to themselves, for that matter, is well, this isn't just a individual issue. This is a religious values issue, not just a liberals values issue.
Mhm.
Because what they seem to be a proponent of are things that are illiberal, but very mythological, I guess you might say, within this Christian Western framework. Like it's things that never were in a way that they present it as if this is certainly how it was.
Yeah, there's this saying, isn't there? The best explanation for nostalgia is a bad memory. So it's just that people just don't realize how bad things were and can get. So, the possible retrogressions in all that, I think people aren't really aware. Because really, if you think about it, the problems, like economic problems we're facing, I mean, there's problems for sure. And there was mismanagement, there were bad decisions were made, and so on and so forth. But, compared to, the 1930s or the 1830s or like any time
Hmm.
before, I mean, everyone's much better off. Like the poorest person in German society will have like a supercomputer in their pocket, right?
Right.
And will have access to like, housing and things like that. There is homelessness, but homelessness in Germany is for the most part I mean, this might sound controversial, but it is a choice or the the effect of like mental illness and things like that, where people are
Right.
just not capable of like actually, getting their life together, and they need all the help they can get and so forth. But really, like poor people now have like enough to eat. They have, a TV set. They have, a warm place to stay, and that didn't used to be the case, right? I mean, before
Exactly.
you were out on your luck. You were completely, um, just out there, and of course so people tend to forget that, tend to have this sense of perspective as to like what our problems actually are and like how they look in perspective. So that's one side of the coin. And then as you mentioned, like the idea of sort of like having a Christian value system that has been, depleted of its importance in public life, that has been sort of pushed to the side. I mean, that's for sure. I mean, that's the case in places, most places in Europe actually, um, where like almost, I mean, hardly ever meet a religious person who's openly religious, right? I mean, that's very different
Right.
in the United States. It's not really in the discussion even, right?
Hmm.
So this idea that people looking for other kinds of, you know like spiritual outlets or other kinds of quote unquote gods that they can worship. I mean, I think that's pretty valid, as a psychological observation. And simple answers to complex questions are very seductive and very attractive to people like looking for religion-like solutions, or kind of or a framework, even a social
Right.
framework where they can sort of like belong and so on. So of course Germany is different, because when you go far enough to the right, you will actually lose the Christian aspect completely,
Hmm.
because then you get into sort of like old pagan, kind of like Germanic mythology, right?
Right.
Pre-Christian. So that's certainly, when we go far enough to the right, where actually Christianity is looked down on as a sort of weak, mentality, or a weak kind of culture. I think that's a special like German kind of thing, because the Nazis, obviously, they were very much about all that,
Right.
really like down to like witchcraft and
Oh
crazy
yeah.
stuff like that. So a lot
Very
of
much into
the
the occult. Yeah.
Heinrich Himmler, the like head of the SS, was really into like he tried to prove that he was a descendant of an actual witch, for instance, right? I mean, it's like really, so they were really into that like old pagan kind of thing.
Right.
So the Christian value system to them actually was an obstacle more than anything.
Hmm.
I mean, they had, the Wehrmacht. They had like "Gott mit uns," God with us, on their belts, as a sort of like engraved on their buckles, and so there was this. Of course, they were trying to use what was there in terms of like religious obedience to use for their purposes, but really they
Right.
had, like the Führer was, the people incarnate, sort of like was God,
Absolutely.
and really they had, and was sort of, so because for the Nazis, and I think that's something that you cannot accuse the AfD of, like for them, like, so like the German people and state were one, right? So
Hmm.
that was just an important thing. There was no, and the Führer, Hitler, was the incarnation of that Germanic spirit, sort of like blood
Right.
and soil kind of thing. So very much anti-Christian
Would it be more
in their outlook.
appropriate then? Would it be more appropriate then, and given the trajectory of the left internationally, but also in Germany, given the
Right.
trajectory of the left, would it be more appropriate to say that although we can say, yeah, that's just garbage, what's going on the fringe of the right, would it be more appropriate to say that these issues are just co-opting legitimate issues for their own agendas? That they're not necessarily, as you say, I think you're right. It's not pagan far right Nazism, but it certainly is not mainstream conservatism of a right leaning party. Fear mongering. It is more fear mongering. It is more narrative prone. It is more agenda prone to something, taking legitimate issues but turning them into fear mongering as opposed to practical solutions. Whereas some
Yeah.
parties that are centrist and or liberal or left leaning ideally would try to do the opposite of that. But then you have the issue of the um, like the Greens in Germany and the further ends of the of the political left in Germany, which have their own issues too. I think would it be appropriate to say that when journalists, whether in Germany or abroad, just dismiss that and not address why that's happening, say, hey, yeah, how they're approaching it's wrong, but they're these aren't like, this is not the right solution, but these issues are real and we need solutions to them.
Yeah. I mean, there's that approach where you actually listen and you actually like dig deep and you kind of like see like what that void is that they're obviously, taking advantage of and
Yeah.
exploiting. Or, and this has been the case for years, you just call everyone a racist, and that's the end of it. And
Yeah.
you get the good people on the left and the bad people on the right, and all that. I mean, that's been what's been going on, obviously not just here, but everywhere. But in
Hmm.
the end, with these kinds of, in the end, it's always the authoritarians that will benefit and really profit from division in
Well, yeah,
society, because
absolutely.
they can then present themselves as the great unifying force. They identify sort of like an other, an outside, that can be deported,
Hmm.
right? And then that's the end of it. That's the problem solved. Um, and I guess that the example I just gave with the wind parks, um, you know, I think that's a perfect example. It's just like a radical sort of like, like just destroy it all, and then just wing it basically,
Right.
because they don't
Right.
really have, typically they don't really have like a program that is based on actual rational calculations and things like that. It's easy for the opposition to claim these things and say these things, but of course, once they're in power, and there is this argument, okay, let's let them try it. Okay, let's see, because it's kind of like a soccer, or to give like a very European example, like a soccer player, or
It's a
sort
good
of like,
example for me. I'm a soccer player.
yeah, or like a soccer fan rather, who's always like, he could do it better. And then,
Yeah.
you might have a point until you actually give him the ball and
Hmm.
and test it, right? But, there is validity to this argument, but at the same time, obviously, democracy is kind of fragile, and there is just a risk, a danger of it being destroyed completely in the process of them trying out, their ideas. So they're failing because, the the Nazi regime ultimately failed, and would have failed even without World War II,
Right.
because economically they just didn't have a leg to stand on, because it
Yeah.
was it was it was based on exploitation, and they had sort of like a very, like they had like a planned economy that we know, never worked anywhere really,
Mhm.
because markets just work much, much better than like any bureaucrat ever
Exactly.
could foresee.
Right.
But they didn't have like free and open markets and things like that. So probably like the Nazi regime would have dissolved, or would have been thrown, overthrown at some point. But just look at the destruction and havoc they wreaked,
Oh,
and
hell
just
yeah.
and the Holocaust and all these kinds of things, which really goes to show that, you know, just letting these fringe groups like try their theories, like, just in a large scale experiment, that can really, really backfire. So I think people are right to um, be very cautious when it comes to like
Hmm.
working with people like these. And again, you have to differentiate between people like Weidel, who, is a smart person and sort of like more on the libertarian side of things, but she will tolerate these fringe groups and fringe individuals like in her party to such an extent that they've been able to take over like vast like parts
Hmm.
of the party. And they have, I mean, there's, for instance, if you look at the list of candidates for sort of like the regional, because even in the general election you have like lists of candidates from the different regions, and so the one for North Rhine Westphalia, for instance, still has a guy on there, one Matthias Helferich, who just not that long ago called himself the friendly face of National Socialism. So,
Exactly.
it goes really, really far right, and it's just absolutely bonkers what's going on there.
It's
But yeah, I think the Christian aspect that you mentioned, and I guess more importantly, the loss of it, like in the culture, and the fact that it's not even in the discussion, I think that just leaves a void that can easily be exploited by other ideologies, as left or right, I think. But probably more right, because those would have been the people who would have been more religious in the first place, right?
right.
So I guess that's fair to say.
Well, Gerfried, I think this has been a phenomenal discussion. And I would like to, if you're game, I would like to continue this conversation after we get some election results and see your commentary on it.
Sure. Yeah.